Buonasera a tutti. Good evening, everyone. My name is Romina Montanari, and I'm the Food and Wine Event Manager of the Italian Cultural Center, that is the prime nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of the Italian language and culture in the Twin Cities. Tonight, we're presenting Le Vie del Vino, Friuli, Venezia, Giulia, the multicultural wines. Tonight, the wine education will be expertly led by Tom Hyland, a freelance wine writer, educator, and photographer specializing in Italian wines. He has visited Italy more than 75 times over the past 20 years, and he also writes for Italian wine publication like Wine Searcher, Forbes, and The Decanter in England. He authored 2 books on Italian wine, and he currently publishes a subscription publication called The Italian Wine Report. So welcome, Tom Hyland. And also I want to tell everyone that we're recording, and keep yourself muted until the question. And if you want to do the view, speaker view, it will improve your experience. Thank you so much.
Romina, thank you for that nice introduction, and welcome everyone. Both you have grana asciutta. Is it Pinot Grigio or is it Ribolla Gialla?
Ribolla Gialla.
Ribolla Gialla, perfect. Okay.
Chin
I
chin.
have gin. Okay. I have the Pinot Grigio. I'm not only going to have a little sip here, but I just want to show you. You all know what Pinot Grigio looks like, because we're going to talk about Pinot Grigio as well as
this is
a different version of Pinot Grigio tonight. So Romina sent me an email, said, please put up like a back green screen. I just put it up, and for some reason it's getting weird reflections, so I don't have it up, but I'll share with you, a few photos tonight of the region. Instead of just doing the wine presentation, I thought it would be fun, especially since we're all like dying to get to Italy, to put up some photos of Friuli. So let me start with, we'll do 3 different photos here. The first is a photo in the far northern part of Friuli. As you can see, you're right at the foot of the Alps here. This is the Alps, depending on where you are in Italy, have different names. There's the Big Alps, by the border with France. This over here in Friuli in the northeastern Italy, these are called the Carnic Alps, C-A-R-N-I-C. And you don't have wine produced up here. There's no vineyards up here. A little bit too extreme, but you can see how beautiful that is. So that's one shot I wanted to share with you. Another is, and we'll talk a lot about history tonight, and that would be how old Friuli is. And you have these beautiful Roman ruins in a town called Aquileia. And Aquileia, as a matter of fact, is, I looked this up, it was founded in 181 BC. So when we talk about history, that's a long time ago. It was the Lombards settled and made this city famous. They settled there in the 6th century. One last picture. This is a place that's really one of the top. I saw this as one of, not my photo, but one of the top tourist attractions in Friuli. And then the last photo here before we get to the presentation is, this is a wonderful story, and it's another big tourist attraction in Friuli. Does anybody know what this is? This is in a town called Cividale, and this is called the Ponte del Diavolo, or the Devil's Bridge. And when you get a name like that, you can't help but be fascinated by it. It's a beautiful bridge, and the legend, the local legend, is that supposedly, because this was at the time was built back in like the 1400s, the bridge is that old. It was very difficult. It didn't have materials like we have today, or machinery to build a bridge like we do today. So apparently the locals made a deal with the devil that, the devil would make it much easier for them to build the bridge, but that he would own the soul of the first person that crossed the bridge. So whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it makes for a neat story. But anyway, it's had, if you'll pardon the pun, a devil of the time, because it has been bombed several times, World War I and World War II. I'm going to show a photo later on of a war memorial. Terrible, terrible carnage in Friuli, in certain parts of Friuli in World War I especially. So they've had that history as well. But we're going to talk about a lot more positive things tonight. And that would be the wines of Friuli, which is why we're here. So I'm going to open up this PowerPoint presentation. And we will start and talk a little bit about the region and the different. Get this open. Give me just 1 second here. It's not coming up. Oh, there we are. Okay. Get the slideshow thing here. Here we go. My apologies for not having this up sooner. All right, let's start off with this. Okay, we're calling it, there we go. Sorry about that delay. Friuli, Venezia, Giulia. And until a few years ago, the name of the region was Friuli with a little hyphen in between Friuli and Venezia. And in a big executive decision, they took that hyphen out. So now it's just called Friuli, Venezia, Giulia without the hyphen. So Romina, did you want to mention?
Yes, I want to mention that,
why it's called Friuli, Venezia, Giulia?
I just want to mention also that the slideshow it didn't work, so we're still seeing your frame for the PowerPoint.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's okay. You can still try the slideshow. I want to just mention that the name Friuli comes from Forum Iuli. That is the name for Cividale that was given by Giulio Cesare. And that Venezia Giulia is the name that comes from the three Veneto, the three kind of Venice. There was the Venice Tridentina, and the Venezia Giulia. So when these three were divided, the Venezia Giulia that correspond to the Gorizia and Trieste, plus as at that time a Slovenia part, was called Venezia Giulia. So that is the origin of the name. Okay,
I think we have it up now, right? The PowerPoint thing. That look good? Okay. Yeah, and just a few notes on that. Friuli became part of the Venetian territory in 1420. And part of it in the south, the province of Gorizia in the east, and then Trieste, all in the part of the south, remained within the Holy Roman Empire. The Venetian rule came to an end in 1797. It was ceded to Austria. It was then under the rule of thumb of Napoleon. It was a part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and the actual border of the region was defined in 1954 after World War II. There was a memorandum of London. Trieste, it was reassigned to Italy, and the autonomous region of Friuli, Venezia Giulia was finally established. Here's a photo of a small district we're going to talk a lot about tonight, and that's called Collio. And we mentioned in the first slide, this is a region that's multicultural. Okay, this is Collio, and you see the vineyards and on the hillsides here and the beautiful forest. What you don't see in this photo, just behind the forest, is the country of Slovenia. Slovenia is right there. There are still some of the border huts that you used to have to, show your papers to when they were under communist rule. But now those little guardhouses are there, but there's nobody that guards them anymore. So you can drive in and out of Slovenia, and there's some wonderful wines from there as well. And one of the things when we talk about the multicultural is that you do have these different cultures. For example, in Friuli, if you think about any Italian region, you hear the last names, you immediately know you're in Italy. So for example, in Friuli, you have some of the more famous producers are Livio Faluga, Marco Faluga, Giorgio Caluta, Giovanni Fofane, very typical Italian names. But some of the best producers had names, for example, Dario Princic, Marco Primosic, Renato Keber, Eddie Keber, Silvio German. So these are definitely not Italian names. This is the influence of Austria and the influence of Slovenia. You have a lot of Slovenian influence in Gorizia, for example. There is an example of the influence of the different cultures. You can see the names of the towns, both in Italian, Cormone, and then Kinmin, if that's how you pronounce it in Slovenian. I don't have a Slovenian dictionary, so Jazbana, Jazbin. There's the sign for the, the wine route. Strada del Vino in Italian, and then Vinska Cesta in Slovenia. So this is in Gorizia, near Collio, in the Collio district. So here's a map of Friuli, and there are actually 9 different wine districts, and some of them are tiny, and they really make just a tiny little bit of wine. You don't see much of it in the United States. And for example, the biggest part is, if you look over on the western part of that map, the left part of the map, in the middle, that's Friuli Grave. And that's basically sort of flat land. And that's where you see a lot of the inexpensive, the wines that cost $12, $15 on a retail shelf. The Pinot Grigio, some Merlot, even a little bit of Chardonnay Merlot, and some other things. So that's actually a little more than half the wine produced in Friuli, which is rather, rather ordinary. Nice, well-made, clean, simple wines to drink tonight. And you see other things there, at least some from Maggiore, La Tisana. I can't remember the last time I had a wine from those districts. You just don't see those wines. Isonzo, you see a little bit more. We'll feature one winery tonight from Isonzo, the province of Gorizia. But we're going to be looking at 3 different districts. We're going to be looking at Carso, and you see the province of Trieste. The city of Trieste is the capital. I refer to that as kind of the little pinky finger of the region that kind of sticks out right into the Adriatic Sea there. And then we have the district of Collio, and then the Collio Orientale del Friuli. So there's an example of, there's a good, picture of the map. You can see on the big map of Italy how far northeast you are, borders the Adriatic Sea. There's the Isonzo River, one of the 3 main rivers that runs through like the southern, central, southern, eastern part of Friuli. That was one of the clear days I was there. I was telling Romina, photography is a great love of mine, and this is one of the clear, beautiful days when I was there back in 19, because I've been there quite a bit in March and April, and it's the rainy season, and it really rains quite a bit there. Friuli, by the way, it's very, very small. I looked it up. There's only 3 regions in all of Italy that are smaller than this: Molise, Valle d'Aosta, and Liguria. So it's the 4th smallest of all the wine region, all of the regions in area. And in terms of the population, is only 1.2 million people. It's a very small region. In terms of production of wine, it's the 6th smallest. So it's one of the reasons that we don't hear much about Friuli is because it is small. And it's a destination. It's not something, you can't fly from the United States to Trieste directly. You have to connect, you fly into Veneto or Verona, and then there's a small regional airport in Trieste, and I think one other one in Friuli, but usually after you land in Veneto or Verona, you then take a train or drive an hour and a half or something like that. But it's a destination. It's not a place that many people visit. And it's another reason why we don't hear that much about the wines of Friuli. It's not like Chianti Classico, which is so close to Florence, or people who visit Verona. They have Soave and Barlino and the Valpolicella and many other examples like Napoli or big other cities that people visit. So it's definitely a destination. So it's great to be promoting this region. It's beautiful. The wines are superb. It's mostly a white wine region, and you can imagine being that far northeast in Italy. And while there's so many different areas, so many different regions and territories and microclimates, it's a continental climate for the most part, and not so much in the Southwest, like where Campania is, or where Sicily is. It's more Mediterranean climate, but it follows the patterns of weather in the United States, and that the farther north you are, the cooler it is. The farther south you are, the warmer it is. So in the white wines are perfect for cooler climates, as you have here in Friuli. Also Alto Adige, its neighbor to the west. So in the northeast, and you're near the sea, you're near the Adriatic Sea, you have the Alps, you have the influence of the breezes from the Alps. So it's perfect for white wines. They represent a little more than 2/3, actually about 75%, excuse me, almost 3/4 of the total production of wines in Friuli are white. We're going to be looking at the Colli Orientale del Friuli. They actually changed the name for some reason to, instead of COF, they now call it FCO, Friuli Colli Orientale. So that sign's a few years old, but we were talking about the same area here. But that's one of the main territories we're going to be looking at in Friuli for wine. In that territory is a beautiful little area called Rosazzo. That's the Abbazia di Rosazzo, and there's several wineries, including Livio Faluga, that make wine from there. And you can see vineyards not in the valley, but on the flatland there, and then also some beautiful vineyards perched on the hill. That's a common theme throughout Colli Orientale del Friuli, and of course, Colli Orientale del Friuli means the eastern hills of Friuli, and the beautiful white wines made here. Then there's the territory of Collio, and even basic Italian, you know that Collio means hill. And virtually every vineyard in Collio is planted on a hill, which is where the name comes from. And just, you know, winemaking 101 or grape growing 101. If you plant grapes, you plant vineyards, you know, plant grapes, I'm sorry. If you plant vineyards on a hillside, it means that they don't give you as big a production if you planted them on the valley floor. But the valley floor, you get all the heat and you get a ton of production and you get rather ordinary wines. When you plant vines on the side of a hill, there's better drainage. When rain comes, the rain can slide down to the valley floor. So you get a smaller production, but you generally get more flavorful grapes. And that's true everywhere in the world. And matter of fact, I've talked to many Italian producers, whether they're from Friuli or Piemonte or Tuscany, and they all wonder about California. That they look at Napa Valley, and you do have some hillside plantings in Napa, but there's a lot on the valley floor. And they always make fun of the people in Napa, like, why do you plant on the valley floor? You don't get the best wines from there. But you know, they've done pretty well for themselves in Napa. But so Collio is a very important part of Friuli for winemaking. That's in the province of Gorizia. There are 4 provinces altogether. Pordenone, Tom, you mentioned you're from there. Gorizia, Udine, which is in the southeast, and Trieste, which I showed you on the map, is all the way in the southeast, borders the sea. There's another beautiful shot of Collio. Again, you see the hillside vineyards. Not my photo, but a lovely day again. There's a small village, excuse me, not a town, small village in Collio called Oslavia. I'm going to talk about it for several reasons. You see that big monument in the photo. It looks like a water tower, but it's not. It's a war memorial to all the people from the village of, excuse me, from Oslavia that have died in the wars. And apparently in World War I, on one particular day, there were hundreds of people from the village, and not just from that village, but hundreds of troops from Italy and Germany and other countries that were slaughtered on that day. So that is one of the most famous war memorials in all of Italy and really all of Europe. So, and you see the vines around there. So we will talk a lot about Oslavia because they make some outstanding orange wines. So we're going to talk, this Friuli is the home of orange wines, which you may have heard a lot about. Collio has soils that are very famous. I don't want to get too technical here, but they're called ponca, or they're also referred to as flysch, F-L-Y-S-C-H. And what it is, it's a combination of chalky clay that are called marl. It's clay that you can break up really easily in your hand, and then sandstone. And that really kind of adds a lot of nutrients to the soil. And these days you may hear a term that's kind of favored by a lot of wine critics and wine students and sommeliers called minerality. And you know, it's, for lack of a better explanation, it's kind of like tasting rocks. If any of you have tasted rocks lately, but seriously, you get these flavors that really you kind of jump out of the glass. It's not like, you know, an antiseptic clean white wine that sells for $15 a bottle. These wines have a lot of personality, a lot of vibrancy to them. So, but you can almost imagine tasting these wines that you're tasting, you know, this, you know, like you're tasting the soil, this mineral, this sandstone and granite and things like that. So that's just kind of a little point about Collio, about what makes those wines so special. It's not just the climate is great; it's the soils are so specific as well. So the third little district we're going to talk about is Carso, which is Karst in Slovenia. There's a few photos you can see. They're right bordering with the Adriatic Sea, and their soils are reddish in nature. Again, a lot of minerality to them. It adds a lot of character to the white wine. So white grapes. And you might say you've got made a mistake there. You've got Pinot Grigio up there, which is not a white grape, but obviously it makes white wine. The way I showed you before, the glass of Pinot Grigio that I was drinking tonight, which is the Livio Faluga, hold it off to the side here. That's the Pinot Grigio that most of us see. And it's, you can't really, maybe you can see it on that the monitor there, but it's straw and there's actually a little touch of copper to it. So Pinot Grigio is not a green grape or a white grape like everything else here. Of course, the name is the Pinot family. Pinot Noir, of course, would be the black Pinot, which is the grape that you find in Burgundy. And you find it also in different parts of Italy, of course, California and all around the world. And then Pinot Chardonnay, which is normally referred to Chardonnay, is sort of the white Pinot. And then Pinot Grigio or Gray. The grape is referred to as Pinot Gris in other parts of the world. It's most famous in Alsace in northeastern France and in Oregon, a little bit in California as well. So from that grape, as you can imagine, when you make a white wine, the skins are like this. They get rid of the skins right away. The juice is always clear. When you make a red wine, in virtually every grape, the juice is also almost always clear, and they keep the skins out. That's where the colors come from. So instead of the typical Pinot Grigio, there's a few producers that actually make Pinot Grigio that they want to keep that color. They want to keep an orange color. They give it a little skin contact. Instead of crushing the grapes right away and getting rid of those skins, they leave the skins on for a few hours, sometimes even a day. And it's called ramato, which is the Italian word that means copper. There's one of the most beautiful examples. That's from a winery called Vino Roman. They're actually in Isonzo, that little area I talked about. And a nice story here. It's an interesting story. I shouldn't say it's nice because it's not so nice, because the name of the family, and you see that little drawing of that little rooster on the label there. Well, that word in Italian is gallo. Gallo is a rooster in Italy. And of course, that's the name of the family. So for years, the winery was called Gallo. Well, I'm sure you know that there's a little tiny winery in California called Gallo, which started in the 1930s. And when they saw that somebody else was calling their wines Gallo, or Gallo, if you will, they got their lawyers busy. So I don't remember exactly when this switched over, but you can imagine with this little family in Friuli and the lawyers that represented Gallo, you can imagine who won that lawsuit. Okay, so they had to change their name. They called it Vino Roman, but they were able to keep the little Gallo on the label. So that's that story. Go back to the white grapes here. So you have a lot of Pinot Grigio. Most of it is, the straw color, like I showed you, and it may be a little copper in there. But you have a few examples of producers that make this ramato, which is beautiful. It really is very rich, and you get those mandarin orange apricot aromas to it. They're lovely, lovely wines, and they're very dry. The kind of the signature grape of Friuli is called Friulano, which makes a lot of sense. What was interesting about this is that the grape used to be called Tokai Friulano, Tocai, Tokai Friulano. And of course, when Italy joined the European Union, when all these countries came together to originate the European Union, they decided that they would protect all of these different names. So that like the cheeses, for example, like mozzarella from Campania, and I can't think of the big cheese now from Emilia Romagna,
Parmigiano Reggiano.
Parmigiano Reggiano. I don't know how I could forget that, right? Haven't had any in a while. Those are protected, as are certain cheeses in France and certain cheeses in Spain, and olive oils and everything else. So they decided to protect the names of the grapes too. There's a famous wine in Hungary, a certain wine called Tokai, Tokay, which is extremely sweet, extremely expensive. It has a kind of almost a color like of almost like motor oil. It's very deep in color. And I'm not sure how you would confuse a dry white wine with a straw color like Friulano with a big, rich, heavy, syrupy, butterscotchy dessert wine like Tokai. But they wanted to protect those names. They thought there would be confusion. So they were given a year in Friuli. You have to change the name. You can't call it Tokai Friulano anymore. And I remember talking to different producers about this, and as is apt in Italy, there was, try and get 10 producers, if not 15 or 20 or 30 or 50, to agree on a name. So somebody said right away, they said, well, we can't call it Tokai Friulano. How about just Friulano? And people laughed at him and said, well, that's ridiculous. We have to come up with a better name than that. Nobody could come up with a better name. So the grape is now known as Friulano, and it makes some beautiful, probably for a monovarietal wine, for a single varietal wine, those are my favorite for dry white wines. They have a lot of texture and richness. These are white wines that can age very, very well. One of the key signatures of the best white wines of Friuli is that because of this cool climate, because of the temperatures that never get too warm, because of the proximity of the sea, you get the breezes off the sea, because of the mountain winds coming down from the Alps, it stays very cool. They can get to close to 100 degrees in summer, but only for a few days, and that's only in a few hot years. But it stays cool. You certainly have very cool nights. It's perfect for white grapes because you have very healthy acidity to them. And while that term scares a lot of Americans, you wouldn't buy an apple or an orange in a grocery store if it didn't have acidity. It keeps freshness, and it's what keeps white wine aging for a long time. We don't think about white wines aging, but a really well-made Friulano from a small producer, from the best vineyards, 7 to 10 years is no problem. So those are lovely ones. The grape on the bottom there is called Ribolla Gialla, which is the yellow Ribolla. There's another type of Ribolla as well. That is a much lighter wine that Romina has a glass of that to enjoy tonight. A lot of times it's blended with other grapes. It has very high acidity. There actually are some sparkling versions that are made. And when you make a sparkling wine, you need grapes that have a lot of acidity. So, but most of it is made as a simple dry white table wine, and little flavors of melon and a little bit of spice. And it's an interesting wine, but it's not that well known. So you don't see that many examples of it, but there are some good examples in the United States. We'll talk about one from the producer coming up. And then the fourth grape there is called Malvasia. And this is some producers in Italy have tried, California have tried this, and it's a lovely grape. It's one of those grapes, when you pop the cork and you pour a glass of it, pour the wine in your glass, it smells super sweet. You think it's going to be a very sweet wine. It's actually very dry. It smells like apricots. It smells like honey. It smells like lemons, like melons, or orange zest. And it's very, very dry. It's a little bit like a dry Riesling, if you will, and it's low in alcohol. It really makes a neat wine. It doesn't work with everything. It doesn't work with that many types of, seafood like Friulano would work with. But if you're having like a Thai cuisine with chicken or pork, it works beautifully, that sort of thing. So those are 4 of the major white grapes of Friuli. And we're not going to have a quiz at the end of this, so it's okay if you don't remember all of them. So that was the Pinot Grigio we talked about before. The red grapes, putting these 4 up, I don't want to say that this is for trivia because you don't see these too much in the United States. The one that you do see is the one on the top left called Refosco, with this very long name, Del Peduncolo Rosso. And we'll just refer to it as Refosco, but it literally means Refosco of a red stalk. You can see the stalk on top of the picture there. It's a grape with very strong tannins to it. And there's arguments, as who makes the best versions. And even there, we're not talking about world-class red wine. So, but it is planted throughout a good part of Friuli. The grape to the right of it is much more limited in production. It's another grape that has very big tannins, Pignolo. The grape on the bottom left is Schioppettino, that has a little bit softer tannins, and it has kind of this, it has like a dark cherry and plum character to it. It also has kind of a green pepper character to it, and it's not the red wine that that falls in favor with too many people. You need very specific spicy cuisine, like an Indian cuisine, or you need spicy game to go with a grape like that, with Schioppettino. But a number of producers in Friuli, Colli Orientali, make that, and there's some very good versions, and they can age for a little bit, but it has that peppery quality to it. There's an area in Bordeaux, if you drink French wines, called Saint-Emilion, and they have a grape called Cabernet Franc, which is very peppery and spicy. This has some characteristics of that, a little bit lighter tannins of that. And then the last one is for kind of an interest. There's very few producers that make it, but I love the name. Romina, you want to translate that name, or Tiziana?
Yes, it's Tatzelinge, that it means to cut your tongue.
Exactly. And it's to cut your tongue. It's a tongue cutter. The reason for that is that the tannins, we all know what tannins are, that bitter quality in the finish, are so strong in this wine that the nickname for the grape came up, that it's like, whoever thought this up, that the tannins are going to cut your tongue. That's how sharp they are. So I've only seen one producer over here whose wines are represented, but it's a neat wine, and it's definitely it's an acquired taste, as they say. But and again, this represents the minority of Friulian wines. The whites are really the most famous. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but the reds are quite interesting. And you're seeing more people now plant Merlot simply because these are so spicy. And the other thing, again, with the cool climate, they're very high in acid. And we love in America, and most people love around the world, kind of rounder reds, softer acidity, a Merlot or a Napa Valley Cabernet or a Pinot Noir. They don't have really high acidity of them. So that's another kind of strike against them. But they're, with the right foods, they're nice wines. So the red that I like the best is a grape called Terrano. And this is from the Carso district, again, Karst. I can't pronounce that last name. It's a name with Slovenian influence, Skirv. That's the best I can do. But this is one of the neatest reds. And it's a shame that this area is so small. They have one white grape called Vitosca, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then this red grape called Terrano. And it's a kind of a cross between, if you know the red wine called Dolcetto from Piemonte, which I love. Dolcetto means little sweet one, which is one reason it doesn't sell. That's the Piemonte version of it. Terrano is a little bit like Dolcetto in that it's very soft in tannins. The flavors and the aromas are like black plum, black raspberry, raspberry jam, dark cherry. It's just absolutely you pop the cork and the aromas just fill the room. And then there's very soft round tannins in them. It's just delicious. It's the type of thing, I think if you put a bottle and, people didn't see the label, you put it in a brown, a brown bag, and just said, here, try this red, see what you think. People would fall in love with it. It's just absolutely delicious. It's sometimes, it's great to have a red wine that can age for 10, 20 years. But as we say sometimes in the industry, you have to think about those wines. You think about, when should I drink this? You don't worry about that with this wine. And it can age 5, 6, 7 years, but right away when it's released, you just pop the cork. And there's maybe, a half a dozen producers. But there's a small importer in Berkeley, California that has a retail store in Berkeley that represents this. I don't know if there's an importer in Minneapolis or too many other places, but that's for, at least for this producer. There are a few other small ones, but you're not going to find much of this wine. But if you do, you can definitely, try and pick this up because it's such a fun red wine. And it goes with so many foods. I wouldn't really have it with pasta with the tomato sauce. That's not a good match, but with something with like duck breast, it would be wonderful. So, and just as an aside, in terms of finding these wines, and we'll talk more about this when we get to specific wines, there's a wonderful site called winesearcher.com. And it's wine with a little hyphen and then the word searcher. So wine-searcher.com. And it's arguably the best consumer site there is. I happen to write for them, and they have, stories on there that they're very current, the latest, absolutely the latest in, the newest vintage of Barolo, or what's going on in Champagne, or what's going on in California, or new wine laws, or all of these things. And then you can also, click on products and just write in the name of a wine and click on that, and it will tell you different stores that carry the wine. So that's a great way of finding these wines. And it also gives you a suggested retail price. So that's a very valuable website to use, whether we're talking about wines from Friuli or any part of Italy or anywhere in the world. So, okay, let's talk about some of the best producers now. We're going to start off with Marco Faluga. There's Marco there in the blue sweater, and his son Roberto. Okay, they're in Gorizia in the Collio district. They're in their cellars there. They make beautiful whites and reds. Here are a couple of their whites. The first is called Mongri, which is a trademark name, and it's a combination of the word monovarietal, so a single variety, and then Gris for Pinot Gris. So Mongri is their wine. And this happens to be a Pinot Grigio Riserva, which you rarely see. Again, Pinot Grigio has become sort of a staple for many Italian wineries, and most people want to spend about, $15 to $18, maybe as much as 20. But in Collio Orientale, in Friuli, and I would say 2 other regions in Italy, Alto Adige, which was covered in a webinar a few months ago. And then there's a tiny region, all the way in the northwestern part of Italy called Valle d'Aosta, or the Aosta Valley, AOSTA. And there they're growing Pinot Grigio at like 2,000 feet above sea level on these mountains, extreme viticulture, very limited production, but fabulous Pinot Grigio. So the bulk Pinot Grigio that's grown in many places, even in Tuscany, clean, pleasant, nice wine, really characteristic, really special Pinot Grigio. You've got to go to either Friuli, Alto Adige, or Valle d'Aosta. So this is a Reserva. It gets both a little bit of it gets aging in both steel, and I'm sorry, it's only steel, but what they do is they age it on the lees. When they ferment a wine, you use yeast, just like you're making bread. You're going to start the fermentation for the bread. So to ferment the grapes, you use yeast, and when the fermentation's done, there's still part of the yeast that are transforming into alcohol. And after a while, they die out. Well, they leave those yeast cells, the little dead yeast cells, in the tank, and those are sort of flavor inducers. So even though the job is done and the yeast is dead, there's still the residual flavor you get from the yeast cells. So they give it a lot of the top wines that don't get oak aging. They leave it, and this happens with champagne as well. You give it lees aging for a few months, and it just adds a little bit of flavor. They filter those things out a little bit later on in most cases. Some cases they don't, but that's what this Pinot Grigio Reserva is. We're seeing now on the market for most Pinot Grigios from Collio or Collio Orientale, 2019, and if they're sold out now, the 2020 are just being released now. I've seen a few 2020 whites from Italy and from France, and now that we're in the harvest was in September, so now we're a good 6-7 months later. So 2020s are up. This the current reserve, the Reserva, the current vintage is 2017. So you can see it's 3 years old, but it's in great shape. They definitely released this a couple years later. Then they have what Collio has become very famous for, a blended white, just called Collio Bianco. This is called Molamata, which is sort of an interesting name. It's Mola is the local name for an old water mill, and it's near one of the vineyards that Marco Faluga owns. And apparently the story is that the water flow in this water mill was so strong that even when the mill was not working, it was still turning because of the water flow was so strong. So they thought that was a little crazy, and the local word for crazy is matha. So it's the crazy windmill, or the crazy, not windmill, but water mill, excuse me. So that's a blend of Friulano, which we talked about before. Pinot Bianco, I didn't mention that, but that's another popular grape. So 40% of Friulano, 40% Pinot Bianco, and then 20% Pinot Grigio. And you see a lot of the wineries in Collio and Collio Orientale make these blended whites. This is kind of the claim to fame of Friuli. They make excellent Pinot Grigio, excellent Pinot Bianco, excellent Sauvignon. We would call it Sauvignon Blanc. But it's these white wines, these blended whites called Collio Bianco. They're the most famous. Now, we'll come to a couple in a minute here that are very expensive. This is $26. Look up the price of wine searches. So it's very reasonable if you want to get an example of a Collio Bianco that's reasonable. The current vintage, I believe, is 2018. And this is aged in both steel and oak. So that's a very, very famous. Those are two of their most famous examples. They also make some red as well. But here is Livio Faluga. And this is Livio. I was talking to Tiziana and Romina before we started. He lived a very long age. He just died a few years ago. He made it to 102. And while his family was growing grapes and making some wine, a good back in the 1880s, it was in 1956 that Livio Faluga started his own winery, and it really became sort of the signature winery of Friuli for some of the top white wines. That's a label from one of his first vintages of Pinot Grigio. They just called it Pinot back then. And he has specialized these labels now. This is the current Pinot Grigio. They have this map on there. Get this up, sorry. There we go, too close. But they have these ancient maps up there. They're beautiful labels, very easy to identify. And that is his son. Livio passed away at 102. I was actually invited to his 100th birthday, and I was actually traveling that day. It would have been impossible to get there, but that was back in 2014. So he lived a long, long life. He was very well loved in Friuli. And his son, Andrea, has been the winemaker. And Andrea is the cousin of Marco, the younger man here. So they are related. And if there is a signature winery from Friuli in this country, you would have to say it's Livio Faluga. Marco Faluga is very well known. Also, they have a national importer, but Livio Faluga has had a national importer for the last 25 plus years. So you should be able to find everything from his Pinot Grigio all the way up to his blended whites here. So these are two of the most famous. The one on the left is called Abbazia di Rosazzo. I showed you that picture at the beginning. This is a blend of Friulano, Pinot Bianco, Sauvignon, Malvasia, and Ribolla Gialla. So you get a wonderful combination here with the Friulano. You get the richness. The Pinot Bianco, it's very strong with apple aromas and flavors to them. Sauvignon, like I said, is Sauvignon Blanc. It's a little more herbaceous, like basil and green pepper. Malvasia, I mentioned, it has those sweet fruit aromas like, apricot and things like that. Ribolla Gialla has a little spice to it and very good acidity. It's a wonderful blend. This is the 2017 vintage. And it comes in those big fat, the great picture there, big fat bottle. You can always use those things as barbells and keep yourself in shape. They're very, very heavy, strong bottles. You see that beautiful map, that label map, that Abbazia di Rosazzo. That sells for about $50 a bottle. It's very limited production. The most famous one is called Terra Alte, which of course means high land. That's the 2016 label. 2017 is the current vintage. This is a blend of Friulano, Pinot Bianco, and Sauvignon. It's been made since 1997, and I've written a number of articles about Faluga and about this wine. And I asked Andrea, I said, how did this come about? How did you and your father plan this wine? And like a lot of the best producers in Italy, since they're so close to France, they love wines from France, and many of them visited Burgundy. And he had tried, along with his father, some of the great white Burgundies. We always think of Burgundy, we think of red wines, but the famous white Burgundies like Pudigny-Montrachet or Chassagne-Montrachet or Corton Chardonnay. These are white wines made entirely from Chardonnay that can age for literally 25, 30, even 40 or 50 years from the best vintages. And of course, you have to keep them in a very cool environment. Not every bottle ages that long, but they are capable of aging for several decades. And Livio and his son Andrea said, we should model that. We should follow that model, excuse me. We should make a white wine. It's not one grape, it's blended, get the best of the best and put these grapes together and come up with a white wine that can age this long. There's a very famous wine publication in Italy called Gambero Rosso. Several times over the last decade, I've seen they've had vertical tastings where they go back 20 years. And the wines that are 20 years old are in great shape. They lose some of the freshness, but they pick up other aromas, sort of a waxy, dried fruit aromas to them. The wine is amazing. Now it's $60 a bottle, so it's not something you're going to drink every night, but it is considered by virtually every wine writer in Italy or anyone who studies Italian wines as one of the top 5 Italian white wines. It really is a signature white wine, not just a Friuli, but in Italy. It's a great, great wine. They make another white wine, and I didn't have this at the beginning. It's from a grape called Piccoli. And of course, Piccoli, you can imagine the word piccolo meaning little. If you look at that picture, and it's the only picture that had any clarity to it I could find. I was never able to get a picture of the vine when it blooms, but it has a very strange condition, this particular vine. It's called floral abortion, which means that there are only a few grapes on the vine. This one is a little more healthy than most, but you can see a number of grapes missing there. Nobody picked these grapes off. That's just the way that this particular vine grows. You just don't get many grapes. And so to make a bottle of it, and they're almost always in half bottles like this, 375 milliliters, it takes an enormous amount of grapes. These are expensive. This is $100 a bottle, a half bottle. That'll give you an idea of how expensive it is to make this wine. You see the color there, it's this golden, a little orange. It's a remarkable dessert wine. It's one of the best dessert wines. I think when I went there in 2019, this was a 2003, it was a 16-year-old example, and it was incredibly fresh shape. They aged for a long, long time, and literally when you drink it, you have a half an ounce. I mean, part of it is it's so expensive, you don't want to spend that kind of money right away, but it's also so rich and so lush. And yet it's not too high in alcohol, but it's a marvelous dessert wine. And it's a wine in Italy, it's called the Vino di Meditazione. You could match it up with a dessert, like an apricot tart or something, but it would almost be a waste. The wine is so lush and so rich and so exotic and so distinctive on its own that you just, Vino di Meditazione, you sit there and you meditate. You think about, the world going by and what a great day it's been, and you have a glass of that. So there are just a handful of producers, and most of them are in the Colli Orientale del Friuli, but Livio Faluga is the most famous one, and that wine is imported in the United States if you want to get a bottle sometime as a treat for someone or for yourself. Okay, another producer in Collio is, switching back to Collio now, a little village called San Floriano in Collio is called Gradisciutta, which is the name of a place near the winery. That's the proprietor, Robert Princic. Again, you have that Slovenian influence. Literally, this is a 5-minute drive to Slovenia, this little village. It's also home to these remarkable cherries. I grabbed a bunch. I said, please, we had some, his father was harvesting cherries at the time. This was in May. And then we also drove over to Slovenia, and I brought some back. This is when you could bring food on a plane. But, I was passing them out to people on the plane on the flight home. These were just some of the greatest cherries I've ever had. The ones not only from Slovenia, but also from San Floriano. So that little area is just perfect for growing cherries. So Robert is famous for his white wines. You have a glass of his Ribolla Gialla. Gradisciutta, by the way, the name is a local name. He said the original name was Mons Vini, and throughout the century, with the Slavish, the Slavonian, influence, it's been changed. Grad in Slovenian means castle, and then the Sciutta is like a settlement. So it's a settlement where a castle was. So that's where the name comes from. Robert is one of the young breed of winemakers there, and has been recognized over the last 10 years for his not only excellent wines, but very, very fair quality wines. This has a national importer, friend of mine who lives in Minneapolis, is their local representative. These are all like in the $22 to $25 range for the most part. Very reasonable. There's 2 whites from them and 2 reds. He does make a little bit of Merlot. He's sensitive to the fact that Friuli and reds are not that popular, so makes a lovely Merlot, very soft and round. The Ribolla Gialla, he makes Pinot Grigio as well, which is excellent, and Chardonnay and Sauvignon. Ribolla Gialla, and then he has a blended white called Bratin. This is $26 a bottle. It's one of the best values. If you can't afford Terra Alte at $50 or $60 a bottle, this Bratin is about $26 a bottle. And it's in that approach, that method of blending several different grapes. He also makes a little bit of Cabernet Franc, which we talked about before. Then we come to orange wine, and most of the famous orange wine, this is a producer called Cante. It's made from a grape, and I can't tell you how many times I misspelled that grape, but it's got 2 V's, Vitosca. Like there's that Slovenian influence. This is Carso, and that little pinky finger part of the district of Friuli. Most of the orange wines are made either from this grape or from a grape called Ribolla Gialla. And some of them, there's a producer there called a Castellata, which makes an orange wine. Robert Princic, who we just showed, makes a typical classic, just straw-colored Ribolla Gialla. Romina, you have it in your glass there. And then a few producers in that little town called Oslavia, that little village I showed you before with the War Memorial, make an orange Ribolla Gialla that ages a long time. It's 2007. Some of them age it just in steel, some of them age it in an old oak barrel, and some of them age it in these ancient vessels called amphora. The traditional ones are made out of clay. You're seeing more and more producers now that are using amphora in different parts of Italy. Some of them are the old-fashioned clay. These things are still in use, like in the part of Russia called Georgia. I don't know if that's a separate country now or just a district of Russia, but that's kind of where wine was born. And they have these things literally in the earth, and they're covered, and then they take the wine out after 15 years or something, and the wine ages that long. So in this case, Ribolla Gialla doesn't age that long, but a good 4, 5, 7 years. So they leave. The reason it becomes orange is they leave the grape skins on. In this particular grape type, Ribolla Gialla, and they leave the skins on a long time. It turns orange. Now here's one of the producers, and I have this light up for 2 reasons. As I mentioned, I love photography. I wish I'd taken this photo because it's a superb black and white photo. not only for the technical part of it, but just the passion on this gentleman's face and just, you know, the expression. This is Dario Princic, who's one of the 7 producers that have formed a little cooperative in Oslavia. He's talking about Ribolla Gialla, and I'll leave that up. And I'm sure many of you speak a little Italian. It's not a very difficult sentence, but I love the sentence. I'll leave it up for a minute and let you read it. You can do your own translating, and then I'll do the translation.
I can read it, Tom, if you want. La ribolla di Oslavia è come le persone. Le persone danno il massimo a casa loro. In un luogo estraneo si può dare qualcosa, ma non il massimo.
So the literal translation is that the Ribolla Gialla of Oslavia that he produces, it's like people. People give their best in their own home, but in a foreign existence or in an outside place, they give something, but it's not their best. And I think that's such a great quote, because what he's saying basically and specifically is that we can't reproduce this wine. Ribolla Gialla, the orange Ribolla Gialla, can only be made in Oslavia. We could take the same grapes, we could do the same process somewhere else, but it wouldn't be the same wine. And I think that's true with any great wine. It's called terroir. In Italy, they talk about a wine having anima, having soul. So the best examples of Barolo, the best examples of Brunello, of Amarone. You could say the same thing for, and it's just, I think, a lovely quote that we can't reproduce this anywhere else. It's such a distinctive wine, and it really is if you get a chance to try it. So another producer in Oslavia is Marko Primošić. I mentioned his name before, and he makes several different styles of Pinot Grigio, the traditional style, and then he makes an orange Pinot Grigio. And that's, again, like the Ramato that we saw before. It's got the copper color to it. They just leave it on the skins for several days, and it picks up that orange color. So food and wine pairings. We're running a little bit, running close to the end of the hour here, but we started a few minutes late, so I guess we can go a few extra minutes. Prosciutto di San Daniele, okay? The classic food when you think of Friuli. It's my favorite prosciutto. As I'm getting a little older here, I can't really have too many spicy foods anymore. So San Daniele it has spice, but it's very mild, and it's absolutely just delicious. And it works beautifully with a white wine, high acid white wine that's not aged in oak, just steel aged, like Pinot Grigio, this Livio Faluga. I visited one producer. Actually, no, we visited the producer of the prosciutto, and we saw where they salt the salumi, where they salt the prosciutto, and then how they age it and everything. And then we went to like a local bar in San Daniele that specialized in prosciutto di San Daniele. You get a plate of that, you get a glass of a high acid white, like a Pinot Grigio. That was so much fun. One of my favorite memories of Italy. So other food pairings. Let's start off with Ribolla Gialla or Pinot Grigio would be fine as an aperitif or lighter first courses. Friulano, you see the picture in the top left there of risotto. So Friulano is perfect with risotto, with pasta primavera, with polenta. Friuli is very famous for polenta, or lighter seafood. Sauvignon, what we call Sauvignon Blanc. Rich seafood like branzino, which is my favorite fish from Italy. I guess it's other people refer to it as sea bass, if I'm correct. There's a picture of it in the bottom left there. Or Sauvignon would have to go with a very rich pasta with cream sauce. Again, Sauvignon has that herbal character to it, so you can see all the herbs that are being added with that fish. So perfect match there. Refasco and the other reds, grilled meats, hearty pastas. Montazio cheese, which is made from cow's milk, or an aged pecorino cheese. Or pecorino, of course, being a sheep's milk cheese. With the orange wines, the food pairings would be like a Thai satay, which you see there on the left, a chicken or pork Thai satay for the orange wine. And then I was able to conduct a tasting of these back in Chicago about 7 or 8 years ago with the producers. And a friend of mine is a professional photographer. It's a beautiful photo. It was a chef who had an Italian restaurant and a sushi restaurant. So it goes beautifully with sushi as well. And that is the end of our presentation. So any questions? We have a few minutes left.
Please go ahead and unmute yourself to ask the question. Write the question in the chat. Let's see if anyone has a question. Otherwise,
a lot of people are shy. They don't want to ask the wrong question. But.
Okay. I have a question. Can you try, when we did the Alto Adige, can you compare the wine of Friuli to the Alto Adige, Tom?
They're very similar in many ways because it's the climate is similar. And the first picture I showed of Friuli way in the north, in Alto Adige, the Dolomites, excuse me, not the Alps, are much more dominant, and you have vineyards like really literally right at the foot of these mountains. Probably the acidity is even higher in the wines of Friuli, and the wines are even spicier. So the Alto Adige wines like Pinot Bianco, for example, would be a little bit rounder and softer. Same with Pinot Grigio. Alto Adige, of course, has a famous white wine called Gewürztraminer, which is very spicy, but very good high level of a natural acidity, but even a little bit higher and a little bit more intense. I would say are the white wines of Friuli, at least the blended whites. You don't see too many blended whites from Alto Adige.
Yeah, it could also be connected, with the fact that it's the rain, it rains so much more than Alto Adige. This region is really
right.
The most rainy region, in Italy, and that maybe could be also the factor. Okay, someone wrote a question. What would be the traditional pairing with orange wines?
Yes, I see that. Yeah, I'm not sure that there's a traditional pairing because it's such a limited, wine that when I've had it there, it's basically been in tastings. We haven't had it with dinner, so I'm not sure that there is a traditional pairing. I try to come up with some things there I think would work well with sushi. I've gone to different Thai restaurants. In Chicago, we're very fortunate to have a lot of BYOB restaurants. Many of them are Thai, and it works beautifully. But like I said, with Thai chicken or pork, so unfortunately there aren't too many Thai restaurants up in Friuli. But so that's probably why I haven't had it with dinner. But it can work with certain seafood with the right sauces. With the fruit sauce, I think it would work beautifully with that. So, which one of these wines is available in Minnesota? Again, I don't know, not being from Minnesota, but I purposely chose, with the exception of the Toronto, I purposely chose wineries that have national importers. So Marco Faluga, Livio Faluga, Gradisciutta, all have national importers. And I know Minnesota is a very good market. I know you have a famous store up there called Serdix. So even if they don't have the wine at Serdix, they should be able to get it. Again, that little Toronto might not be able to find, but you could certainly you could find that. The importer in Berkeley, Cheryl's asking, it's called North Berkeley Imports. They have a website, just go to Google, look it up. So they've like everybody else, have been hit by COVID because they had a retail store that saved their business quite a bit. So, but and they work with other importers around the country. So it's not only in Berkeley, but those are things you can order. I don't know the reciprocal policy. It keeps changing as to what states California can ship to. I think they can ship to Minnesota. I'm not positive. I think Illinois, but it keeps changing all the time. Our politicians get so worried about this stuff that the states are going to lose a few pennies in tax dollars, but whatever. So, but that's the name of the importer. But I purposely, when I choose these wines, I want to make sure that they're available. I'm not trying to find somebody that's got 500 cases and some small importer in Florida or Delaware or somebody, or Arizona had these wines. So Gradisciutta and Faluga, both the Falugas are nationally imported, and you can find them in Minnesota without too many problems.
Do you have any? Okay, what is the important in Berkeley?
Yeah, I just mentioned that.
Yeah. Okay. The other question would be like, do you have any other blends, like white blends from Friuli that you recommend?
There's another one from a winery called Livon, L-I-V, this is Victor, O-N. And they sort of borrowed the tradition of Livio Faluga, who has Terra Alte. Livon calls it Braida Alte, B-R-A-I-D-E, Braida Alte. And then there's a wonderful producer, very small, but if you can find it, they don't have national importer, but they may be able to get it. So again, go to Wine Search, you can look this up. But the producer is called 80 EDI Keber. Again, that's Slovenian influence. K-E-B as in boy, E-R, 80 Keber. And he has a white wine that's blended from several grapes. He doesn't call it Colio Bianco, he just calls it Colio, because to him, Colio was white grapes. There are a few red grapes planted in Collio, but it's almost like redundant to say Collio Bianco. So, and his is not too expensive. I think it's about $25 a bottle, maybe 30, but it's not like the Faluga wines. But I had the wine both at the winery, and I had a recent vintage, superb white wine. So those are a couple other blended whites you can find from Friuli.
There's a question about Dario Princic, if he's a relative of Simčić in Slovenia. Also, Rob, just
Princic is like finding it in Conterno or Manzone in Piemonte. It's a very common name. I don't think that they're relatives, but I don't know for sure. Sorry. Certified organic or biodynamic in Collio, there are quite a few. I don't know every one, but there are quite a few. The conditions there and the fact that they are, in such small producers and planted on hillsides, it's rather high. The percentage, I mean, it's not perfect conditions because the weather is so cold and it rains all the time, but in terms of their philosophy, there's quite a few people that if they're not certified biodynamic, they are certified organic. You're seeing that more and more in Italy these days, but especially with white wines and with cooler areas. So Cheryl has another producer to show us.
This is Daniele Lanuzza.
I don't know him. Okay.
Colli.
Schioppettino di
Yes, Schioppettino di Propoto.
Okay.
And a tiny little village of Propoto. And the mayor of Propoto is actually the one that brought the Schioppettino grape back into existence in Propoto. So now it's
nice story.
kind of like Walter Massa of the Timorasso.
Yeah.
This is Propoto, Propoto's namesake, Schioppettino.
And is that something that you brought back from Italy, or is it something that's imported where you live?
No, actually, the producer came to see me, and so I'm going to see him. I'm going to visit he and his wife and little girl July of 2022 when I can travel over there.
I was going to say not this July, but okay, but that's great. That's a story. But yeah,
it also makes a beautiful Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon.
Lovely. I will mark that down. I'll have to look that up the next time or contact them.
And he is completely certified and with biodynamic practices.
Yeah, I think a lot of the wineries, they're very strict rules. So not everything that they make within their vineyards are certified organic or biodynamic, but certain projects that they have, certain wines they have are from 100% certified organic. So it's a difficult question to answer, but the percentage of wines coming from there that are certified organic or biodynamic is one of the higher percentages in all of Italy.
I have one more question, Tom. Do you know about the Faluga family? Which one of them is the president of the consortio? Was it Robert?
It was Marco.
Marco, okay.
I don't know that he still is. I don't have that information in front of me. I can check, but Marco was the head of the consortio. It was actually Marco. That's right. Who I think is still with us. I'm not positive. I didn't check on the website, but I believe he is. That's a recent picture, so he wasn't quite as old as Livio, but that may have passed on. I know, like Robert Princic was the head of the consortio in Collio, but these are usually like 7-year periods that they're head of the consortio. So somebody else is the head of that now. I think it's Marco Princic, but it goes back and forth. So,
Tom, Luca Di Vito has a question for you. That is the director of the Istituto Italiano di Chicago.
Okay.
Hi, actually it's not a question, but actually I wanted to thank the Italian Cultural Center in Minneapolis for organizing this. And I'm very grateful to Tom for this accurate description of the area and wines that I know very well because I was born and raised between Gorizia and the Colli Orientali.
Oh, really? Okay.
And actually, if I had heard this conversation at a different moment, it would have made me very melancholic and eager to go back. But actually, I'm flying home in 2 days for some holidays.
Oh, great.
So it gave me even more, anticipation and enthusiasm to go back and find again all the beautiful landscapes that you portrayed and shared with us in those pictures and the flavors of the wines that you mentioned, which I know very well and I appreciate a lot. So thank you very much for this.
Prego. Sei molto fortunato. I have to wait another 6 months, but you probably know this, and just for people that want to come to Chicago sometime, but there is a famous restaurant here in Chicago, and it always happens to me. I get my little senior moments here. And the restaurateur is from Trieste. And I'll have to look this up. I can't think of his name right now, but he had a 1-star Michelin in New York. He moved from Trieste, came to New York, worked with Lydia Bastianich for a while, who was from Istriana, which is part of Friuli, and opened up a 1-star Michelin restaurant in New York right away. And then he and his wife had their first child, and they said, we don't want to send our child to school in New York. We want a more normal upbringing for him. So they moved to Chicago. And you don't see too many chefs move from New York to Chicago. It's usually the other way around. And his wife is an architect, and it's a beautiful restaurant. I'm sorry, the name is escaping me right now. Pelego, I just thought of it. P-E-L-A-G-O, Pelego. And his name is Mauro Mafrici. And that picture I had of the sushi, that was his creation. He is a superb chef. His restaurant is just off of Michigan Avenue. It's in the Highmark district, but you should visit there because he has on the menu a couple of dishes that his grandmother made for him, and that's always starred. Those are some of his favorites. And he does traditional foods, but does it in a modern way. And you know, it's not classic Friulano where it's all seafood. It's a little bit of everything, and he has a fabulous restaurant, one of the most beautiful dining rooms in the city. And Romina or Tiziana, if come out to Chicago, you should visit that. It's Pelego, and it's just off Michigan Avenue. And Mauro Mafrici is the chef, and I've been fortunate to have lunch and dinner there several times. It's absolutely just great. It's one of the best in Chicago. And the fact that he got a 1-star Michelin and just, you know, tells you something right there. So anyways,
thank you for your suggestion.
We'll have to meet when you come back. I'll get your email through Romina, and then we'll have to, when you get back, we'll have to have a glass of wine together. So
absolutely, with great pleasure.
Okay, è stato un piacere.
Un piacere mio.
Okay, Romina, thank you.
Yes, thank you, because I think we ran a little bit over,
Yeah.
and thank you for everyone to be here. Thank you, Tom, for giving a great presentation, and thank you for the support to the Italian Cultural Center and for the Italian language and culture. Thank you, everyone. Grazie a tutti e grazie a Tom. Ok?
Grazie a tutti.
Arrivederci
Ciao ciao.
e buonasera. Ok.
Buonasera, buonanotte.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Alla prossima.